welcome back to Helming Athletics. We're talking running today about what our foot does through the gait cycle, through our whole stride. Now, a lot of focus is paid attention to what happens when the foot hits the ground, but a lot is dictated on where that foot hits the ground in terms of where it goes up in the air and how it goes through. And we see that we focus in running especially on this pulling component. And I think it's helpful before we focus too much on pulling, which is very important, we want to look at the whole thing. And I think it's really helpful to compare our running with cycling, in that our foot is doing this very circular-like motion. It's very, very obvious on the bike, this wheel-like pattern. But believe it or not, with running, that heel, that foot ankle travels back, it comes up, forward, and goes down again, and it travels back up, forward, and down again. And there's this same wheel-like pattern. Now, you could say that in both situations, cycling and in running, there's a pushing component and a pulling component to that cycle, right? That pushing is on the way down and the pulling is on the way up. The pushing, we can say in the bike, is really important. It's also really important running. This is where we would generate power, right? Think of someone jumping, doing a long jump, running up a big set of stairs, up a steep hill, driving into someone else. Cycling, we see the same thing. We're really focusing on the driving aspect, that first part of the pedal stroke. But what happens if we focus on pushing too much? Well, in cycling, we become mashers. We start pedaling squares, is what cyclists call it. And they say, hey, if I just push hard, I lose something in the transition. My pedaling isn't smooth anymore. Guess what happens with runners? The footfall is really heavy, and the stride rate, the cadence is kind of slow. So if we focus too much on pushing, it becomes a slow, heavy thing. So what have coaches done to solve this problem? Well, they say, hey, we got to focus on pulling too. And with cycling, they have little pulling drills, one-legged drills where you focus on scraping the mud off your shoe, is what they say, and pulling up and back and around, and really working on that back half of the pedal stroke. Now, are you really producing a lot of power? Are you really producing 400 watts pulling up and back over? Not necessarily, but what you're helping do is smooth out your pedal stroke. You're getting yourself through that transition a little bit faster and back to that power-producing pushing stage a little bit sooner. With running, it's the same thing. It helps us speed up our cadence so we can have that light, quick cadence a little bit more, and it prevents us from hitting really hard on the ground. So pulling in both cases is important, but it's a cyclical thing that's going on in both situations. All right, now a very popular pulling drill in running, especially coming from the pose method, is this drill where I just literally, I call it a forward lunge drill. Sometimes I call it a pony drill. I'm pulling that heel directly up the inseam of my other leg, directly up underneath my butt. And it's a very helpful pulling drill. But I think what happens, once again, if we take these drills or these cues too literally, is that we think that our leg fires in this upright piston-like pattern. And in reality, it's not just this, but it's this that's happening. Right, so our notion of pulling and understanding of the stride cycle when we run really makes sense when we bring in our understandings of posture. And we talked previously how, falling is sometimes you could say it's an inaccurate cue. We're displacing our center of mass over our base of support. But if we fall too much, we always lead with our chest or our head, and then what happens is that our hips become a little bit soft and we lose something. And what we lose is that elastic band recoil that happens when we wind our hips up. And remember, when we drive those hips forward, we wind up that band. And all of a sudden, when our leg extends and goes back and forth here, we get that little elastic snap and recoil. Our speed is always a function of how big our stride is and how many steps we take in a certain minute. That's it. So to be fast, we have to have a high cadence, but to get a little faster, I can maintain the same cadence, take those slightly bigger steps. That only comes through hip extension. I have to drive my hip forward, and that allows that leg to carry back behind me. If my hip's a little soft, guess what happens? That leg has nowhere to go, so it goes out in front of me, and I end up doing a little bit of heel strike. But I can't just fix the heel striking. I got to go back to the hip position first. Understand by this notion of shifting my hips forward and not falling. We're always looking for runners to get a little faster. I think that as a coach, it's important to look at that big picture thing. We always want you running a little faster in a bigger gear. That's always what we're looking for. So check it out, run faster, and let me know what you think.